My mother-in-law ripped my shirt in my kitchen and screamed my wife owned everything. Elena said nothing. So the next morning, I changed every lock, and that was only the beginning. She ripped my shirt in my own kitchen. One clean tear down the front of a white Oxford I had ironed 20 minutes earlier because Marjorie Price noticed things like wrinkles and used them as character evidence. The sound cut through the room. Sharp. Deliberate. Final. For half a second, nobody moved. The coffee machine hummed behind me. The roast chicken sat untouched on the island. Marjorie stood close enough that I could smell her perfume, something powdery and expensive, layered so thick it felt like another person in the room. "My daughter owns everything in this house," she said. Not screamed at first. That came later. The first version was lower, colder, certain in the way people sound when life has taught them that volume is optional because obedience usually arrives early. She still had a fistful of my shirt in her hand. "Elena gave you this roof. Elena gave you status. Elena gave you a name people respect." I looked past her. My wife was standing 3 feet away, one hand on the back of a dining chair, her face pale and unreadable. "Say something." That was all I needed. Not a speech, not a defense. One sentence, one visible line in the floor between her mother and me. Elena looked down. That was the moment. Not the shirt. Not Marjorie's perfume or her fingers clenched in cotton like a trophy. My wife looked at the floor, and something cold inside me finished becoming a decision. My name is Grant Mercer. I am 36 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life learning that ownership is not a feeling. It is a document. My father, Robert Mercer, founded Mercer Ridge Capital in 1991 from a rented office above a pharmacy in Raleigh. By the time he died in 2019, the firm managed roughly $410 million in client assets and employed people who still called him Mr. Mercer even after he told them not to. He left the company inside a family trust. I am the chair. He also left me enough personal assets to buy a 4-bedroom brick colonial in historic Oakwood in May of 2020. I paid for it in full, in my name alone, 7 months before I married Elena Price. That timeline matters. No joint title. No refinance. No marital transfer. Marjorie loved telling people Elena had settled Grant down and given him a real home. I let her say it. Some lies are useful when you want to know who feels comfortable repeating them while you listen carefully. I met Elena Price at a charity dinner in the fall of 2020, the kind of Raleigh event where old money pretends not to notice new money, and everyone knows exactly who sponsored the flowers. She was 32 then, sharp, funny, and warm in a way that felt unperformed. Elena asked about my father's firm without sounding hungry for it. She asked about my house like she cared where I felt safe, not what it cost. When she laughed, she leaned forward like the room had briefly become smaller. I wanted badly to believe that meant something. Her mother was harder to romanticize. Marjorie Price was 63, widowed, and polished to a shine no human being naturally maintains. Silver blonde hair, cream blazers, lipstick never on her teeth, perfume arriving 5 seconds before she did. She had built her entire emotional architecture around Elena, and she treated her daughter's life like property she managed. Elena's success was Marjorie's proof. Elena's marriage was Marjorie's jurisdiction. From the beginning, Marjorie looked at me like a man squatting on land she had planned to develop. At our rehearsal dinner, she told my aunt that men with inherited companies often needed strong women to keep them humble. Elena heard it. She smiled too quickly. I should have paid attention to that smile. It was not peace. It was already practice. The first red flag arrived 6 weeks after Elena joined Mercer Ridge as acting director of operations. I was in my home office, Reviewing expenses when a charge stopped me. $46,700 billed to Holloway Renovations. No contract in the vendor folder. No project code. No board approval. I sent it to Malcolm Reed, our CFO, who had worked beside my father for 18 years and had the calm of a man who trusted ledgers more than people. Can you trace this? He called the next afternoon. It was approved by Elena, Malcolm said. For what? A pause. Kitchen renovation. We are not renovating any Mercer Ridge property. No, he said carefully. Marjorie prices. I looked through the window at the oak trees my father used to love. That evening, I asked Elena about it. She apologized immediately, too smoothly. My mother was embarrassed, she said. The contractor needed a quick payment. I meant to reimburse it before month end. She did reimburse it. That made forgiveness easy. Too easy. I told myself it was one bad judgment call. A husband wants to believe his wife before he believes a spreadsheet. That was my mistake. The second flag came 4 months after our wedding. Elena had approved an $18,900 payment to Low Country Advisory LLC, categorized as operational strategy. There was no website. No phone number beyond a voicemail box. No physical address that survived a basic search. When I asked for the deliverable, Elena sent me a 4-page PDF with stock language about workflow optimization and regional growth alignment. It read like someone had taken our company name and stapled it onto a template. I wanted to push harder. Instead, I told myself she was new to the role and embarrassed by a sloppy vendor. That is how you lose months. Not because you are blind, but because love keeps offering less painful explanations. The third flag was quieter. Marjorie started knowing things. Not gossip, not social scraps. Numbers from quarterly reviews. A board discussion about restructuring analyst teams. The fact that Malcolm had been considering retirement before Malcolm had told anyone outside my office. At Sunday dinner, she mentioned it while cutting into salmon. Elena will need a firmer hand when Malcolm leaves, she said. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. That was becoming a pattern I did not yet know how to name. I watched my wife chew slowly, like silence was something she had practiced. And I understood that Marjorie did not need access. She had Elena. By winter, I had stopped trying to explain things to myself. I started documenting them. My father used to say, if it is not documented, it did not happen. He meant wire transfers, board minutes, client approvals. He did not mean marriage, but by then the distinction had started to feel cosmetic. I created a folder in a personal cloud account Elena could not access. I named it Audit Notes, because calling it my wife maybe stealing from my company felt too dramatic for a Tuesday night. Into it went the Holloway Renovations charge and reimbursement record, Low Country Advisory's invoice, the 4-page strategy PDF, screenshots of vendor approvals under Elena's credentials, a timestamped note about Marjorie discussing Malcolm's possible retirement before Malcolm had told the board. I did not know what I had. I only knew I wanted it somewhere she could not delete it. In January, I called Vivian Klein. Vivian practiced family law and corporate governance, which sounded like two separate worlds until my life became the place they collided. She had 22 years of experience, gray suits, rectangular glasses, and the stillness of a woman who had watched enough marriages turn into litigation to stop being surprised. Our meeting lasted 90 minutes. She let me talk. Then she said, again, this time in chronological order, with dates. So I started over. When I finished, she tapped one finger against her legal pad. Do not confront your wife yet. I had expected that. What I had not expected was the next sentence. Something in my chest tightened. Vivian slid the Low Country invoice back across the desk. I want a forensic accountant before we move. Not suspicion, not emotion, a full picture. That was the first time I understood strategy could feel colder than anger. Owen Rusk's initial review took 6 weeks. He worked quietly from Mercer Ridge records I had full legal access to as trust chair, the same way a surgeon works quietly because the screaming comes later. Vivian called me on a Thursday and said, "Come to my office. Do not tell Elena." Owen was already there when I arrived, sitting beside a binder divided with color-coded tabs. He was a former IRS examiner with 19 years in forensic accounting and the personality of a man who believed numbers did not care how badly you wanted them to mean something else. He opened tab 1. Low Country Advisory, LLC. Registered through a Delaware shell, then another consulting entity in South Carolina, then a holding company with no employees and 1 beneficial owner. Marjorie Price. I felt my jaw lock. Owen did not pause for my reaction. Tab 2. 3 additional vendor payments over 14 months, totaling $52,600. A spa retreat in Asheville categorized as executive wellness consulting. A lake house rental filed under client relations lodging. A private school grant for Marjorie's grandson that had no school attached to it and went directly into a personal checking account. Vivian made 1 note. Only 1. That scared me more than if she had filled the page. Tab 3 was worse. 2 loan authorizations drawn from Mercer Ridge operating funds and routed first to an account in Elena's name, then partially transferred out within 48 hours. Total, $235,000. Both forms carried my signature. I stared at the first one until the letters stopped behaving like letters. "That is not mine," I said. "No," Owen said. "It is not." He slid over a preliminary report from Dr. Helen Cho, a forensic document examiner with 28 years of handwriting analysis. Her finding was careful, professional, and devastating. The signatures were inconsistent with my established pattern. Slant. Pressure. Spacing. Initial stroke. Terminal stroke. A stranger had copied my name badly enough for an expert to prove it, but well enough for my wife to move money through my father's company. Not just theft, not just marriage. A breach of fiduciary duty wearing a wedding ring and using my last name. For a moment, I could not hear the room. Then Vivian tapped her pen once. "Grant," she said, "I need to ask you something before we move forward." I looked up. "Are you prepared for what this exposes?" I thought about Elena looking at the floor. "Yes," I said. And meant it. Vivian and Owen did not move immediately. That was harder than it sounds. Once you know someone forged your name and used your father's company like a family ATM, patience feels obscene. You want doors slammed, phones seized, confessions dragged out under bright lights. Vivian wanted something cleaner. "Ongoing conduct," she said. "If they argue this was old, misunderstood, or corrected, I want proof they're still doing it knowingly." So I waited. I slept beside Elena for 9 more nights. I drank coffee across from the woman whose signature sat next to mine on Christmas cards while Owen followed ownership trails and Vivian drafted letters no one had received yet. The last piece came on a Tuesday evening. I was reviewing the vendor queue in my office when an authorization request appeared. Pinecrest Services, Inc. $31,000. Emergency operational support. Elena had submitted it 2 days earlier under her credentials, marked priority. The registration looked clean for about 12 minutes. Then I found the forwarding address. Different state, different shell. Same pattern. I sent Owen the filing at 7:22 p.m. At 7:46, he replied. Beneficial ownership traces back to Marjorie Price. This is what we needed. I stared at the screen. Not relief. Confirmation. The wound was still moving. The shirt tore the night before everything became visible. Marjorie had arrived for dinner without asking, which had become normal enough that I had stopped naming it as strange. She brought a bottle of wine nobody wanted and opinions nobody had requested, then spent the first half hour explaining what Mercer Ridge needed from its restructuring plan. Not asking. Explaining. Elena sat beside her, cutting salad into smaller pieces than necessary. When Marjorie mentioned Malcolm's replacement by name, a name discussed only in a closed executive session, I set my fork down. Marjorie, I said, you do not work for Mercer Ridge. Her smile did not move. No, she said, but my daughter does. And she has more sense about the company than you do when you're sentimental about your father's ghost. Elena whispered, Mom. Not stop. Not don't. Just Mom, the soft warning people give when they want the damage quieter. After dinner, Marjorie followed me into the kitchen while Elena hovered in the doorway. You are going to apologize tomorrow, Marjorie said. To this family. You will tell Elena you overreacted, and you will stop undermining her authority. I told her to leave my house. That was when her hand closed around my shirt. One clean tear. White cotton opening down my chest while my wife watched. I let my voice shake when I said I did not want to fight. I had learned that people like Marjorie mistake restraint for surrender if you package it correctly. Fine, I said. Tomorrow. Marjorie laughed. See, she told Elena. He learns. When they left, I went into my office and locked the door. I reviewed everything one final time. Property deed, Owen's report, Dr. Cho's signature analysis, Vivian's draft to the board, and the Pinecrest filing with its timestamp. Everything clean. Everything documented. At 11:47 p.m., I changed the smart lock codes on all 4 entry points. Front door. Back door. Garage. Side gate. Then I saved the kitchen footage in 3 places and slept better than I had in months. For once, the house finally felt like mine again. At 7:04 the next morning, my phone buzzed with an Arlo notification. Front door. Motion detected. I opened the feed and watched Marjorie Price stab her key into my lock like force could make metal remember her. Once. Twice. Then harder. She stepped back, checked the key ring, and tried again with the offended concentration of a woman who had never accepted a closed door as information. I leaned toward the laptop. This house was never yours, I said softly, to the screen, to the footage, to myself. She pulled out her phone. By 8:15, Elena was pounding on the bedroom door. Not knocking. Pounding. The full flat of her palm hit the wood over and over, and for a strange second I thought about how many years I had spent believing sound meant urgency instead of entitlement. I was already dressed. Navy suit. White shirt. Different shirt. No tie. I had been awake since 6, coffee finished, documents stacked on my desk in the order Vivian had recommended. I opened the door. Elena stopped mid-swing. People always falter when they expect you broken and find you organized. You changed the locks, she said. You and your mother no longer enter this home without my permission. This is my house too. I handed her the deed. She looked at it like paper had no right to contradict her. Purchase date, May 2020, I said. Paid in full. My name only. Never transferred to the marital estate. Never refinanced under joint title. never pledged as collateral for any Mercer Ridge obligation. Her eyes moved faster as the meaning arrived. That is not possible. You never asked, I said. You assumed. Those are different things. Her phone rang. Marjorie's name filled the screen. Elena answered before she could stop herself. Her mother's voice burst through the speaker. Call the police. Tell them your unstable husband locked you out of your own home. Please do, I said. Elena looked at me then. Really looked. As if newly awake. For the first time in our marriage, my wife was not afraid of losing control over me. She was afraid she already had. At noon, Marjorie came back with reinforcements. Tara Price, Elena's younger sister, stood behind her with folded arms and the wary expression of someone who had been told only the version that made me sound unstable. Uncle Dennis leaned on the porch rail like muscle borrowed from a family barbecue. Beside them, a locksmith from Dale's Lock and Key held his tool bag and looked increasingly aware that this job did not smell like a normal lockout. Marjorie wore a cream blazer and courtroom lipstick. My daughter owns this property, she told him. Her husband is having an episode. I spoke through the Ring doorbell before the locksmith touched the door. The police are approximately 2 minutes away. I would advise you not to drill into my lock. Marjorie smiled into the camera. You think cameras scare me? I think they should, I said. The kitchen camera recorded audio last night. Her smile changed. Not disappeared. Changed. There is a difference. Disappearance is fear. Change is calculation. I continued, every threat, every word about Elena owning this house, the shirt, the tear, my wife's silence, all of it is time-stamped. Tara looked at her mother. What shirt? Marjorie did not answer. Officer Renee Calder arrived at 12:08 with another Raleigh PD officer behind her. She had the calm, practical face of someone who had handled enough domestic property disputes to know most of them could be solved with one question and the patience to repeat it. I met her at the door with the deed. She read it once, then looked past me at the porch. Ma'am, she said to Marjorie, do you have documentation establishing ownership of this property? My daughter is married to him. That is not documentation. My daughter lives here. That is also not documentation. Elena stood near the walkway, silent again, but this silence was different, smaller. Officer Calder turned to the locksmith. Sir, unless you have paperwork from the legal owner, I suggest you leave. Dale's Lock and Key became the fastest-moving business in Wake County. Marjorie's face hardened. This is a family matter. No, I said from my doorway. It was a family matter. Then you brought tools. Then you brought witnesses. And now everyone here knows exactly whose door you were trying to force open with no paper in your hand at all. At 2 p.m., after Officer Calder left and Marjorie stopped yelling long enough to call someone else, I sent one email. Vivian and I had drafted it 2 weeks earlier, then revised it until every sentence sounded less like anger and more like a door closing. The recipients were the Mercer Ridge Capital Board, Malcolm Reed, our CFO, Lawrence Bell, the independent director, my Aunt Caroline Mercer, and the co-administrator of the family trust. Attached were Owen Rusk's forensic report, Dr. Helen Cho's signature analysis, and Vivian's memorandum outlining unauthorized vendor payments, shell ownership, forged loan authorizations, and immediate risk to company assets. Then the machinery started moving. At 2:07, Elena's corporate card declined at a private club downtown where she had apparently gone to collect herself over lunch. At 2:09, the automatic payment for Marjorie's Lexus, funded through an account tied to Mercer Ridge operating money, bounced. At 2:14, Elena's assistant called me in a controlled panic. Grant, Something is wrong with Mrs. Mercer's credentials. She is locked out of everything. I looked through the kitchen window at the porch Marjorie had tried to command an hour earlier. I know, I said. Thank you, Kesha. Paper moved faster than blood ever had. At 2:31, Elena rang the doorbell. I unlocked it from my phone. Not because I had changed my mind. Because I wanted her inside the house. She had spent years letting her mother call hers when this became official. She walked into the kitchen with her phone and a face I had never seen before. Not rage. Not charm. Something stripped down. What did you do? She asked. I poured coffee into 2 mugs. Even while ending a marriage, some part of you remembers how the other person takes it. I set hers on the counter. I contacted the board. You humiliated me. No, I said. You used Mercer Ridge Capital accounts to pay your mother's renovation, Lexus, spa retreats, lake house rental, and shell vendors tracing back to her. You submitted 2 loan authorizations with my forged signature. You tried another $31,000 through Pinecrest 2 days ago. Her mouth opened, then closed. I could see calculation arriving late. Grant, we can explain this. I looked at the torn shirt folded on the chair, one sleeve hanging loose, the tear facing up. I had left it there for myself, not theater. A man needs reminders when love bargains with memory. My father built that company, I said. I chair the trust. You were never the owner, Elena. You were an employee with a borrowed title. Then I turned my laptop around. The video call had been running for 4 minutes. Malcolm Reed, Lawrence Bell, my Aunt Caroline, Owen Rusk, and Vivian Klein were all on screen. Vivian sat with both hands flat on her desk. Owen had the forensic report open. Malcolm looked older than he had that morning. Elena grabbed the back of a chair. You recorded this? I documented it. Her voice dropped. You love me. That was the first honest weapon she had reached for all day. I looked at the woman who had watched her mother rip my shirt and chose the floor. I loved the woman I thought would stand beside me, I said, not the one who stood aside while her mother tried to erase me in my own kitchen. Malcolm was the one who broke the silence. He did not raise his voice. Malcolm never did. He read numbers like weather reports, flat and impossible to argue with. Holloway renovations, $46,700. Lexus payment, $1,200 monthly, routed through operating reimbursements. Asheville Spa Retreat, $7,800. Lake House Rental, $21,400. Private School Grant, no institutional recipient. Lowcountry Advisory, $52,600. Pinecrest Services, pending, $31,000. Elena stared at the laptop like the screen had turned traitor. Then her phone lit up on the counter. Marjorie. Elena reached for it without thinking, hands shaking just enough to show. Don't, Vivian said. Too late. The call connected through Elena's Bluetooth speaker. Marjorie's voice filled my kitchen. You promised me no one would find that. A confession wearing her own voice. No one moved. Not Elena. Not me. Not Malcolm on the screen. Even Owen stopped writing. For one clean second, my house felt quieter than it had ever been. Then Vivian tapped her desk once. Mrs. Mercer, she said, your access credentials have been suspended effective 2:22 p.m. today. The board will convene a formal vote on your removal as acting director. Based on the documentation already reviewed, that vote is expected to be unanimous. Elena whispered my name. Vivian continued. Owen Rusk's forensic findings have been transmitted to the Wake County District Attorney's Office. Dr. Cho's signature analysis is attached as an exhibit supporting a forgery complaint. Marjorie was still on the line, breathing hard. For once, she had nothing useful to tear. Outside, Marjorie's voice rose again on the porch. Through the kitchen window, I could see her waving the dead key at Officer Calder like metal could become evidence if she held it high enough. "I have a right to be here," Marjorie said. Officer Calder's answer was calm enough to cut glass. "Not without documentation, ma'am." I turned the laptop toward the window feed and opened the folder labeled Kitchen March. Vivian did not ask what it was. She already knew. I pressed play. The previous night's footage filled the screen. Marjorie in my kitchen, perfume and certainty, stepping into my space. Her hand closing around my shirt, the white fabric tearing open. Elena in the doorway, silent. My own voice saying I did not want to fight. Marjorie laughing. "See," recorded Marjorie said. "He learns." The live porch feed showed present-day Marjorie hearing her own voice through the open window. Her face changed. Tara heard it too. So did Uncle Dennis, who suddenly looked less like backup and more like a man wondering whether he had parked far enough away. Marjorie turned toward the camera outside. "You planned this," she shouted. I looked at Elena first. Then at the board. Then at the woman on my porch who had mistaken volume for ownership. "No," I said. "You did. I just kept the receipts." Nobody spoke. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Outside, Tara stepped down one porch stair, then another. Her arms unfolded slowly, like belief was leaving her body through her hands. She looked at Marjorie, then through the window at Elena, then back at her mother. "Mom," she said, so quietly the camera barely caught it. "What did you do?" The answer was already playing. Elena moved out 11 days later. Not dramatically. No suitcases thrown down the stairs. No final screaming from the porch. Just a furnished apartment near North Hills, one moving truck, and the strange quiet of a woman discovering how expensive ordinary life becomes when a company card stops pretending to be income. The Wake County District Attorney opened a formal investigation into the forged signatures. Dr. Helen Cho testified at the preliminary hearing. Owen Rusk was retained as a consulting expert in the broader financial fraud case. Vivian filed the civil recovery action on behalf of the Mercer Family Trust. The board vote was unanimous. Elena's removal as acting director was formalized in a written resolution signed that week. Her employment contract was terminated for cause, which mattered because the morality clause had been added 2 years earlier at Elena's request, after she insisted leadership needed higher standards. I did not point out the irony. I thought about it. The lake house lease was canceled. The $235,000 in forged loan authorizations became the center of the recovery claim. The Pinecrest Services payment was blocked before it cleared. People kept asking if I felt vindicated. I did not know how to answer that. Vindication sounds clean. This felt like walking through a room after a storm and realizing the broken glass had been there for months. You are relieved the wind stopped. You are still barefoot. 6 weeks later, Tara called me. Her voice had none of the certainty she carried onto my porch. "I didn't know all of it," she said. "I knew Mom was difficult. I knew Elena let her run things. I didn't know about the money or the signatures. I believed her halfway. That sounds cruel until you understand that halfway was more than I could give most people then." "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. And I did. Partially. Spring came quietly. Malcolm retired in May after training his replacement himself, because men like Malcolm do not abandon ledgers just because the room caught fire. On his last day, he left a card on my desk. "Your father would have respected the way you handled the truth." I kept it there anyway. I still live in the brick colonial in historic Oakwood. People ask that carefully, like the house should feel haunted because Marjorie tore my shirt in the kitchen and Elena chose the floor. But the house was never the problem. The people who mistook access for ownership were. The kitchen gets good light in the morning. It comes through the east windows and lands on the pine floorboards my father liked when he first saw the place with me. He said a house should have one room where a man can think clearly before the world starts making demands. For 3 years, I let other people make demands in that room. I do not anymore. The Ring camera still works. So do the 4 smart locks, all controlled from my phone. Front door, back door, garage, side gate. I check them less now. In October, I repainted the kitchen warm white. The color it had been before Marjorie's opinions and Elena's silence made every wall feel borrowed. I did not keep the torn shirt. I thought about it, then threw it away. Some things are more useful as memory than evidence once the evidence has already done its job. What I needed was not the fabric. It was the sound. That single clean tear that finally cut through 3 years of noise and told me where I was standing. On ground I owned. Elena signed the divorce papers in January. She did it quietly, without conditions, because her attorney had explained what Vivian had explained to mine. Contesting the marital estate would require producing financial records Elena had every reason to keep out of court. There was no final scene. No apology. No collapse, no screaming, no last look across a courthouse hallway. Just signatures, copies, and the administrative end of a marriage that had survived too long because silence kept dressing itself up as patience. I heard she was in the North Hills apartment. I heard Marjorie had moved in with Tara for a while, which must have felt like exile to a woman who believed every door should open because she raised the right daughter. I do not wish Elena harm. That is not forgiveness. It is distance. I no longer wish her anything at all, which turned out to be the cleanest ending I was going to get. My father used to say, build on ground you own. Everything else is just weather. He was talking about business. He was talking about everything.